Thank you. Good afternoon still, and again, everyone. I am really excited to invite our next speaker up and introduce her now. Melissa S. Cody was born in No Water Mesa, Arizona, to a multi-generational family of acclaimed Diné weavers. And she first learned to weave at the age of 5 years old. Along with learning the practice of weaving, Melissa learned the history of weaving within her Navajo community. And with that, the waves of innovations and adaptations that weavers created through different periods of time. Her work is a contemporary embodiment of this tradition of innovation and transcends boundaries of artistic canons. Melissa's weavings appear in museum collections and exhibitions across the country, including in a recent solo exhibition at MoMA PS1. And I'm also very excited to say now that one of Melissa's very recent works, Sailing the Cosmos, hangs in the new Arts of Indigenous America's galleries here at the DeYoung. And I want to say a huge thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to Melissa for this beautiful, beautiful artwork that we're so honored to have. We're really excited to have Melissa here with us today. So please help me in joining. No, I did that wrong last time too. Please join me in welcoming Melissa to the stage. Thank you.
Hello, yat Shea Melissa Cody and Ishia, Topahan Nishle, Hashganzo Bashchin, Sitna Jini Dashache Do Nakai Diné Dashanele. Hello, everyone. I'm Melissa Cody. I firstly wanted to introduce myself in the Navajo language. I'm from the Navajo Nation in northern Arizona. In my introduction, I mentioned that I'm of the Edgewater people clan, the banana, aka the yucca fruit strung out in a line people clan, the black streak in the wood people clan, and then also the Mexican people clan. So I just wanted to let everybody know what my clans are, so in case there's anybody here who I'm related to, we can make that connection. So I wanted to thank Hillary and everybody here at the DeYoung for having me. My relationship with the DeYoung goes back a number of years, as I was an artist in residence here at the DeYoung, probably close to 10 years ago, if not longer. So I was actually right across in the Kimball Gallery, where I brought multiple looms and textiles to work on while I was here at the museum. This first piece in this slide is a 127-inch by 42-inch Germantown sampler. So I started weaving at the age of 5. I learned from my mother as well as my aunts and my grandmother. I learned by watching, and then I also had formal instruction by my mother actually sitting me down at the loom and actually teaching me each individual step one by one. And as I was going through my weaving, introduction, I started off doing a lot of really traditional or regional patterns. So I used a lot of more muted colors, vegetal dyed wools. So I started off using a lot of pastels, but my designs were always intricate. When I was in middle school, I actually was introduced to the Germantown Revival style. And that's what the pieces here are going to also be in, is the Germantown Revival style. And when I say Germantown, during the long walk period of the Navajo history in 1860s, 1870s, the Navajo were forcefully removed from our traditional homelands and were forced to march to Bosque Redondo. So it's essentially like the Navajo version of the Trail of Tears. So while the Navajo were rounded up and imprisoned, part of the rations included blankets that were made of material that was milled in Germantown, Pennsylvania. So when the Navajo women received the blankets, what they did was they unraveled them and then rewove the wool into their own styles and designs. So even though when you look at my work, you see this, really bright, vibrant, eclectic color palette, it's actually a throwback to that historical period of our history where the plied yarns of the Germantown era were chemically dyed. So you get these really bright, vibrant colors. Let's see. So this piece is 90 inches by 51 inches, and it is called Motherboard Vibrations. And with a lot of my work, I really try to include like a middle ground, foreground, background. And so that way the viewer's eye is really being pulled into the piece and actually experiencing it beyond like a two-dimensional plane. So you can see here, I use a lot of these blocks and pixelization as kind of like a reference to my childhood. You know, I'm a child of the 80s, so I grew up with the first Atari, Nintendo, Sega, and so I really like to highlight what I call the noble pixel. So I really like to have, you know, the pixels exist in their own space and have their own movement and existence within the different planes. So you'll see that I'll have a lot of pixelization work within each individual textile. And so keeping with the Navajo tradition, I don't draw any of my designs out before I start. So everything is based on math and geometry. So with a piece like this, I'll probably have a few hundred vertical warps that I'm working with. And I count each warp, and then I break it down into geometric color schemes. And so I keep the design in my head, and I make, you know, shifts, and I introduce new colors when the measurements are right. So again, even if I did draw the designs out, it probably wouldn't translate exactly onto the weaving plane. Okay. So I like to work in these really large format pieces. I currently have 2 8-foot pieces on the loom at my studio in Long Beach. My brother and my dad make all of my looms, and so I have about 3 9-foot to 11-foot looms at my studio, so they're really heavy duty. And I weave these starting out sitting on the floor, and then as the textile moves up, I actually move up with the textile instead of, you know, folding the textile to the back. So that's like a difference between the way that I work instead of just sitting on the floor the whole time. So by the time I'm done and I'm working at the top of this textile, I'll actually be sitting on platforms up near the ceiling of my studio. And you can see that in some of my earlier works, I only work with about 20 colors, and that was back in the late 90s. And currently I work with about 125 colors. And so this was my solo exhibition, Webbed Skies, and it opened at the Museum of Art Sao Paulo in Brazil. And so it wasn't necessarily a retrospective, but it was a large survey from the textile that I first started when I was 5 years old, all the way up to the current. So you can see in the exhibition space, you can kind of get a better idea of the scale of the works. One motif that I've been really focusing on right now are these connected hourglasses. And so the hourglass is representative of like a black widow, and the spider is a very important person, a very important energy for the Navajo people, because excuse me, it said that Spider Woman brought the knowledge of weaving to the Navajo people, and then Spider-Man aided and brought the loom and then also the tools to weave. And so that's where you get a lot of the references to the spider. And then the central image of the large hourglass is representative of me, and the 2 smaller ones are representative of my 2 kids. So this piece was created in 2013. So with a lot of my work, I really tried to bring in kind of like a thesis before I start, a body of work. And this particular body of work was revolving around the passing of my late fiance. And so I did a whole series of text-based textiles. And this particular piece, and I think with most of them, I wove all the text upside down. So I wove it from the top going down, and then I reversed it when it was time to display it. And so this is the exhibition Web Skies that traveled from Museum of Art Sao Paulo and opened at PS1 MoMA in New York City. And this is the main entryway into the exhibition, so it has the more monumental pieces. And in the far wall is my textile called World Traveler. So again, going back to the idea of having an idea of what the body of work is going to be kind of tuned to, this piece is called Deep Brain Stimulation, and it's in the collection of the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And it's titled Deep Brain Stimulation because of my dad's diagnosis to Parkinson's, and deep brain stimulation is a operation that he did actually have where they put electrodes in both sides of the brain. And so that's where you get the different sides, left side, right side of the brain in this textile. So this was one of the first kind of monumental pieces that I made. This is also part of my Parkinson's series, and it's called the dopamine regression. And so this one, I really tried to understand my use of negative space. And so I used the black to make these stencil outlines and really worked with, again, using large swatches of negative space and trying to almost do these layered effects of the serrated diamonds to make these wallpaper-esque backgrounds. So currently, I'm also working in, I'm working with jacquard digital weavings, and this one is 89 inches, and you can see that it incorporates a few design motifs from my actual hand-woven pieces. And so I've been able to revisit some of my earlier works and rework them into these larger format runner pieces. And so even though, it's a digital loom and it's programmed through specific codes, a lot of work goes into actually, producing the image, vectorizing the image, and then each individual code has, each individual color has a specific 4-digit code that has to be fed into the jacquard loom. So it takes months to even have a textile ready to go. And my larger hand-woven pieces, they take anywhere from 6 to 8 months a piece, and that's working 5 to 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. If I'm on a crunch, or if I'm trying to make a deadline, I can do a 16-hour day. This is another jacquard piece. So again, you can see a lot of the pixelization, kind of like the rainbow, which is reminiscent of the Nintendo Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Kart. So the Rainbow Road. And this piece is called Dopamine Dream because it takes kind of that trippy vibe effect. And you can see, again, the pixelizations in the middle. Okay, let me see. It's 4:15. I think we'll want to try to get some question and answers in. Yeah. Oh.
So, okay, great. So we have, Melissa has asked me to help with questions, and do we have any mics that are available to be passed? If not, I'll just repeat the question. We have a question down here.
What is the process that you said when you did the handloom? What is the process of this other modern one that you mentioned? But how do you do that? This other process that you mentioned.
The jacquard?
So what is the process of the digital jacquard loom?
Well, the digital jacquard loom is one kind of like mapping out the actual textile. So the jacquard programming, I work with two other people who are schooled in this specific program that the jacquard weaving machine runs off of. And so I initially start with a color palette of 10 colors plus black and white. And from those colors, the program will give me a color ribbon of about 1,200 colors. So each of those individual colors has a code. And so I have to choose which code to assign to each color within my pattern. And so once that's done, the actual design has to get vectorized into Photoshop and Illustrator, because the jacquard weaving machine will weave it exactly to the pixel of what your vector image is. So if you have two pixels off, it'll weave those 2 pixels off. So there's like a lot of going back and forth and making sure that everything is cleaned up, lines are crisp, codes are right, and then so this goes on over the course of a few months.
But the machine does the weaving then?
Yeah, it's a digital jacquard machine.
Okay, and then you didn't finish what you said. You almost told us, you said 8 to 16 hours a day, but you didn't say how many months it took to do the hand one, and then how long it takes to do the digital one.
Yeah, the hand weaving takes about 6 to 8 months.
And the digital?
The digital, it just depends on the coding. Some designs are more complex than the other, but all of my digital work probably over the course of 2 to 3 months.
And last question, is the digital made with like raw wool?
Yes, it's made of wool. Yeah, and so the digital jacquard weavings are all wool, and then the textiles that do have fringe, those are hand tied by myself. So that's another process.
More questions? Yes, right here.
Which would you say is your proudest work and why?
So which
My
would you say is your proudest work and why? Good question. That's a tough one.
I would say, let me see if I can flip back. Of the jacquard, I think I like this piece the most, scaling the caverns. I think dopamine regression and then also world traveler are kind of like my favorites because, well, this one was, like I said, my introduction to like really pushing myself and just trying to compact it with so much detail that it was like almost overloaded. But it was a time where I was doing a lot of experimentation, so I like to think back to that time, and that kind of gives me like a lot of inspiration in my current work to kind of, remember how I felt when I was working on this piece.
More questions? Yes, in the back. Carolyn, you're going to have to speak loudly.
Melissa, could you speak to your experience as a contemporary Native artist coming from a very traditional background of weaving?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fourth / fifth generation textile artist. And so, I grew up going to these Native American art shows and art exhibitions. So I grew up like at the museums and spending my weekends, running around art markets with my cousin and my brother and my sister. And so as I was, working through my weaving career from 5 years old, I was always around a lot of other weavers who weren't necessarily my family, but I felt like they also brought me up as a weaver and, saw me kind of blossom into my own weaving career. And so as I was making these Germantown pieces, I really got inspired by the Germantown because, the sampler came out around the time of the Long Walk, and, being imprisoned at Bosque Redondo, the Navajo women were still feeling inspired by one another. They were still exchanging ideas. They were still exchanging, these different levels of creativity and, making the most of the materials that they had, but, making this really dynamic work. And so when I think back to the spirit of those weavers, I want to carry that over into my own point of view in terms of how I approach my own work. So I want to be able to be constantly pushing myself, have that, continuation of creativity within the pieces that I take off the loom. But I also want to be like a steward of the information that I've obtained throughout, the last, 37 years. So as I've gone through my career, I've been really, really pushed and supported by my mother and the other weavers in my family, and especially my grandmother, Martha Gorman Schultz. I think she was probably one of the biggest inspirations in my life, and she actually passed away this year at the age of 93, and she wove all the way up until her final year of being on this, planet. And when I tried to, think of the kind of weaver that I want to be in the future, I want to be somebody who is, pushing the art form forward, who is also, kind of breaking the boundaries and breaking these stereotypes of what Native American or Navajo weaving should look like. And that's where I really want to be able to kind of like, in my own way, foster up and coming weavers to really explore, Navajo textiles in a way that tells their own personal story, as opposed to, having our art being dictated by, outside entities, whether it be traders or gallerists or, just outside influence. So within the last 10 years, I've really pushed for like the reclamation of the Navajo whirling log. I've really pushed for a lot of experimentation within the Navajo textile medium. So again, I'm just trying to, open the doors for more opportunity for Navajo artists.
More questions? I have a question then. So you said when you were working on the loom and your hand woven pieces, you don't draw out the designs ahead of time. But then for the jacquard loom, you must draw out the designs ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So has that changed your sort of mental process as you're working on pieces? Was that an adjustment for you?
It was definitely odd because there's more of a finality to, really being very precise in all of the work leading up to it, where if I'm sitting at the loom and I have an idea that I'm going to weave and I'm thinking ahead, I can always change the design. So once I, when I'm working with the jacquard, once I have the design, mapped out and it goes to, the next step of vectorizing, then it's pretty much hands off of it. The design is done and I can't go back and change it.
And can you go, if there's, the 1 pixel's off, can you fix that or do you have to start again?
You can go back in and make revisions, but it's just a really tedious job.
And one last question about that loom. Do you have one of the looms, a digital loom in your studio, or do you go somewhere to use one?
No, the digital loom is not in the United States.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, any last questions from someone that's not me? Yes, right here. Oh, is it Laura?
Hi, thank you for your talk. Similar to the design, could you tell us more on how you choose the titles for each of your works, and if that is something that may be, assigned at the start or also comes in at the very end?
I usually don't title the piece until I take it off of the loom. I actually don't really brainstorm the title until it's done because I feel like the energy changes once it's off the loom. And for a long time, I actually didn't title my pieces like individually. I kind of like generically would title it, you know, Germantown sampler, or Navajo weaving, or Navajo textile, burnt water, or wide ruins, you know, whatever the traditional patterning most identified with, because I didn't think that it was my place to have my personal like attachment to the piece, because I feel like I was still learning, and I was still trying to really find, you know, what my voice was going to be within the medium. And so when I felt more comfortable and more confident in the work that I was weaving, then that's when I started titling it.
Yes.
What is your current project or future project, and what would you say is the inspiration for those?
Right now, I'm predominantly working on the larger hand-woven pieces. I kind of like the format where they're more elongated, almost reading like a scroll, because I feel like, you know, with each individual phase, especially if we go back to the first textile, you can see that scroll element. Whoops. This one right here. So it's called the Three Rivers. So the way that I wove it was on the bottom. I started with that green border, and then wove it in these kind of like three phases, which was actually pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and then after. That's when I wove this piece. And I like being able to, again, read it in a way where you can see that the weaver is, one, changing direction in terms of what, you know, is being woven, but also you can see the changes in color. You can also see like changes in the selvage sides. Like sometimes they'll kind of bow in a little bit, sometimes they'll be a little bit looser. So those are all things that, you know, as a weaver, I pay attention to. So I like being able to kind of like figure out what was happening on the weaver's end when I look at these kind of like scroll-esque textiles.
Yes, in the front again.
Thank you. A couple of questions. One, how are the new technology textiles accepted in the museum world, also like in the competitions, or I don't know, you enter competitions or shows, and they do hand out blue ribbons and stuff. How are the textiles that are not hand woven accepted? And I've seen some of your other incredibly spectacular, beautiful works that seem to be a different. Do you have any that you could quickly run through that are not the Georgetown or
Germantown?
the Germantown, but there's some. Is there another school of weaving that you also do? I think I've seen in the past.
I used to work predominantly in the traditional styles of burnt water, wide ruins, eyedazzler, and like crystal, because that's what my mom taught me. And they're designs that are, you know, highly detailed, and they keep your attention and they kind of keep you on your toes. And so that's why I was really, you know, drawn to those types of designs. What was the first part of your question?
How digital.
Oh, the art. Yeah. I haven't entered any of the jacquard pieces. I'm sure it would have to be in like some sort of contemporary, or I don't know if it would be like, I know for sure it wouldn't be in a traditional category. But, you know, that's one thing that I you know, because my background is in museum studies, and I'm really like an advocate for, you know, us as Native people telling our own stories and being able to like label our own artwork the way that we see fit, because, you know, not that long ago we were, you know, next to the dinosaurs and cavemen, and we were never really, you know, identified as artists by our names. And so I really wanted to kind of push that idea of bringing Native American, especially women's artwork, to the forefront in terms of it being seen as fine art as versus just craft, you know. So in terms of like, looking at a lot of art markets, I haven't done them in a while. But I do feel like there's a lot of double standard within some of the markets because a lot of Navajo weavings are held to a standard that you don't see like other mediums, especially if we're always asked, is it hand spun? Is it hand carded? Did you raise your sheep? But if you go to another medium, it's like, did you pick all your pigments? Did you, where did you get your canvas from? Where did, there's a very different eye that, or very different kind of like microscope that we're under. And it's, it's just one of those things that has yet to change.
There's one right here.
I'm curious, in your studio practice, you mentioned you have a number of looms. Do you work on more than one piece at any given time, and do you have assistants helping you with the weaving, or is it a solitary process?
It's a solitary process, yeah. I have 3 large looms that I usually have at least 2 with projects going. Right now I do have 2, and then I have about 5 or 6 small looms upstairs in my studio. So I actually teach weaving courses. I'm currently doing, I think it's like my 4th installment, working with the Autry Museum of the American West in Griffith Park, teaching Native American students how to do the entire weaving process from setting up the loom to finishing their project. In addition to that, I've also worked with like some nonprofits in the LA area, doing weaving workshops at the elementary schools. My latest one was in Inglewood with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. Yeah.
All right, we have time for one more question. I thought I saw a hand somewhere in here, and if not, that can be the last one.
Oh.
All right.
She's
Over there. Yes, last question.
I'm curious, given you spent so long on all of your pieces, including the hand-built ones, if there are any pieces that you talked about today where the idea you started out with was really different from where you ended, or the way you felt about the piece was very different, and then something happened in your life where you got interested and you went somewhere else?
Yeah, actually, probably this piece. It's funny that you mentioned that because, the way that I started, I really wanted this, flowing, almost psychedelic 70s feel, and that's what I started with. But as I kept growing with the pattern, my vibe kind of changed, and it was partly, I wanted to have these isolated, large isolated negative spaces, but I didn't really know how to incorporate it. And finally, I made the decision to add these kind of like checkerboard, the blue and the green, to jumpstart, that transition into the next middle section. But it's rare that I really go off of what I initially start with because I usually have an idea of where I want, bold elements to go. I really have an idea if I'm going to, specifically be using cooler colors versus, the warmer tones. And this one, I knew I was going to do this checkerboard monochromatic black and white and gray and kind of do like these op art references. So this is one of the pieces that I wouldn't say it was more difficult, but it definitely, made me really make deliberate and intentional shifts in the pattern.
Thank you for all these wonderful questions, and thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.